The Great Hall of Valanthos Prime was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known galaxy. Its walls were made of living crystal that changed color with the mood of the beings inside. Today, the crystals glowed a calm blue as over 300 different species gathered for the Centennial Assembly of the Galactic Council. Ambassador Lena Brooks sat in the human section with her small team. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen 30 years of diplomatic service. Beside her sat Commander Jake Torres, her military advisor, and Dr. Nina Cross, the science attach. They were the only humans in a room filled with creatures that looked like nothing Earth had ever imagined. The Villani floated near the ceiling, their bodies made entirely of golden light. The Kryn stood on 4 powerful legs, their armored bodies covered in thick scales. The Gorthaks breathed through tubes connected to tanks on their backs, their home world having a completely different atmosphere. And there were hundreds more, each stranger than the last. Lena had attended dozens of these assemblies. They were usually boring. Trade agreements, border disputes, arguments about shipping lanes. The kind of work that kept the galaxy running, but put everyone to sleep. She expected today to be the same. She was wrong. The Corsian delegate rose to speak. His name was Victral, and he was an insectoid being that stood nearly 3 meters tall. His shell was dark green, and his forearms clicked together as he activated the central display. "I bring a matter of galactic security," Victral announced. His voice buzzed through the translator, cold and emotionless. A holographic map appeared in the center of the hall. Stars and planets floated in the air, and every species watched as the image zoomed in on a small yellow star at the edge of the Orion arm. Soul. The human sun. Lena felt her stomach tighten. She sat up straighter in her chair. "Our long-range sensors have detected immobilization," Victral continued. "The Dreth Collective is assembling a harvester fleet. Their target is the 3rd planet of this system, the planet called Earth." The hall erupted in whispers. The crystals in the walls flickered from blue to a nervous yellow. Lena heard the word Dreth repeated in 100 different languages, and in every voice she heard fear. Commander Torres leaned close to her. "Ambassador, we need to contact Fleet Command immediately." Lena nodded but kept her eyes on the display. She had heard stories about the Dreth. Every species had. They were ancient beings who traveled from system to system, stripping worlds of everything useful. Water, minerals, atmosphere, life. They took it all. In 10,000 years of galactic history, no civilization had ever survived a Dreth harvest. The Council Arbiter, an ancient being called Moltric, raised a tentacle for silence. "This is indeed grave news. We must discuss how the Council will respond." "What is there to discuss?" The Villani ambassador's voice was like wind chimes. "The Dreth cannot be stopped. The humans must evacuate what they can and find refuge elsewhere. Perhaps they could settle in the neutral zones," suggested another delegate. "A few million might survive if they leave immediately." Lena listened to them talk about the death of her world like it was a minor inconvenience. They discussed evacuation percentages and refugee quotas. No one talked about fighting back. No one even suggested it was possible. Her communicator vibrated. She looked down and saw a message from Earth Command. The words were simple. "Dreth, fleet confirmed. 47 capital ships. Estimated arrival, 18 days. 18 days. Her planet had 18 days to live. Her daughter lived in Seattle. Her grandchildren were in school right now, learning math and history, not knowing that an alien fleet was coming to destroy everything they had ever known. Lena stood up. Her chair scraped against the crystal floor, and the sound echoed through the hall. Every eye, every sensor, every optical organ turned toward her. Commander Torres and Dr. Cross stood with her. The entire human delegation rose as one. The arbiter looked surprised. Ambassador Brooks, the discussion is not finished. We must coordinate a response. Lena looked at the ancient being. She had always respected the council, had always believed in diplomacy and patience and working within the system. But the system had no answer for this. The system had already decided that Earth was dead. There is nothing to discuss, she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. We are leaving? The arbiter seemed confused. Where will you go? Home. She turned and walked toward the exit. Her team followed without hesitation. Their footsteps were the only sound in the massive hall. 300 species watched in stunned silence as the humans moved toward the door. Ambassador Brooks! The arbiter called after her. What do you expect to accomplish? The Dreth have never been defeated. Your fleet is small. Your technology is young. You cannot win this fight. Lena stopped at the doorway. She turned back to face the council one last time. The crystals on the walls had turned a deep purple, the color of confusion and sorrow. We're not asking for your help, she said. We're not asking for your advice. We're going home to stand with our people. That's what humans do. She walked out. The doors closed behind her in the great hall. Silence hung like a heavy fog. The delegates looked at each other with expressions of pity and disbelief. They had seen species die before. They had watched civilizations fall to the Dreth with prayers and screams and desperate pleas for mercy. But they had never seen anyone react like this. The Kryn delegate, a scarred warrior named Grothmer, was the first to speak. He had fought alongside humans once, years ago, in a small border conflict. He remembered how they had refused to retreat, even when they were outnumbered. He remembered the look in their eyes. They are not running away, he said quietly. They are running toward the fight. The Vellani ambassador made a sound like sighing wind. Then they are fools. The Dreth will destroy them all. But Grothmer was not so sure. He had seen what humans could do when they were cornered. He had seen their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. And as he watched the doors where the humans had disappeared, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Outside the hall, Lena Brooks walked quickly toward the docking bay. Her team kept pace beside her. None of them spoke. They all knew what was coming. They all knew the odds. But none of them hesitated. Torres was already on his communicator, sending messages to every human ship in the sector. Dr. Cross was calculating jump coordinates. They had work to do and very little time. The galaxy had given up on Earth, but the humans had not given up on themselves. Not yet. Not ever. The news reached Earth at 3 in the morning, Pacific time. Within 10 minutes, every government on the planet knew. Within an hour, the whole world was awake. President Hannah Ortiz stood in the Situation Room beneath the Rocky Mountains. She was a small woman with dark hair and tired eyes, but her voice never wavered. Around her stood generals, admirals, scientists, and advisors from a dozen nations. For the first time in human history, there were no arguments about borders or politics. There was only one question: how do we survive? The Dreth fleet will arrive in 17 days, General Luis Mendez reported. He was an old soldier with a face like carved stone. 47 capital ships, each one roughly the size of our moon. Thousands of support vessels. Our current fleet numbers around 800. Combat-ready ships. 800 against 47 moon-sized. Vessels, said Admiral Kevin Park. He was the commander of the United Earth Defense. Fleet, those are not good odds. No. President Ortiz agreed. They're not. But those are our odds, so we will work with them. What else do we have? The room went quiet. Then Dr. Susan Bell stepped forward. She was the head of the Advanced Research Division, a woman who had spent her life building things that others said were impossible. We have things that aren't officially on the books, she said. Ships that were decommissioned but never destroyed. Weapons that were deemed too dangerous to use. Experimental technology that never made it past testing. If we throw everything we have into this fight, we can field a much larger force. How large? Ortiz asked. Dr. Bell looked at her tablet. Possibly 3,000 ships. Maybe more if we count civilian vessels that can be armed. 3,000 ships. It still wasn't enough, but it was better than 800. President Ortiz nodded slowly. Do it. Call back every ship. Arm every vessel that can hold a weapon. We have 17 days to prepare for the fight of our lives. The orders went out across the solar system. On Luna, shipyards that had been closed for years suddenly roared back to life. Workers who had retired decades ago returned to their stations. Young people who had never held a wrench learned to repair engines in hours instead of weeks. On Mars, the mining colonies stopped digging for ore and started producing ammunition. Factory ships in the asteroid belt changed their programming to build missiles instead of construction materials. Even the science stations around Jupiter and Saturn joined the effort, their researchers turning their brilliant minds toward the problem of killing. Captain Marcus Cole received the recall order while his ship, the Constellation, was patrolling near the edge of the system. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and calm eyes. He had been a soldier for 20 years, and he had always known that a day like this might come. Set course for Earth, he told his crew. Maximum speed. His navigator, Lieutenant Amy Vance, looked up from her console. She was young, barely 25, with red hair and freckles across her nose. Sir, at maximum speed, we'll burn out the engines before we get there. Then we'll burn them out, Cole replied. We can always get new engines. We cannot get a new Earth. The Constellation jumped to faster than light. Behind it, dozens of other ships did the same. Across the sector, human vessels broke from their positions and raced toward home. Cargo ships, patrol boats, even personal yachts. Anything that could fly was flying. Back on Volantis Prime, the Galactic Council watched the human exodus with growing confusion. Their observation probes tracked the movement of human ships, and what they saw made no sense. They are not fleeing, the Arbiter said slowly. They are gathering. Gathering for what? Asked the Volani ambassador. A final ceremony? A mass suicide? The Kryn delegate, Grothmer, shook his large head. No, they are gathering a fight. That is madness, another delegate said. The Dreth cannot be fought. Their shields are impenetrable. Their weapons are unstoppable. Every species that has tried to resist them has been destroyed. Grothmer remembered something a human soldier had told him once, after a battle where the humans had lost many of their own. The alien had asked why humans kept fighting when they knew they would take losses. The soldier had looked at him with strange eyes and said, "We don't know how to stop." On Earth, the preparations continued. In every city, volunteers lined up to help. Factories ran 24 hours a day. Schools became emergency shelters. Hospitals prepared for casualties they prayed would never come dawn in Seattle. A young mother named Maria Santos watched the news while her children slept. Her husband, Diego, was a pilot stationed on one of the orbital defense platforms. He had called her earlier that night, his face tired but determined on the video screen. "I might not come home," he had said. "You know that, right?" "I know," she had replied. "But you're going to try. I'm going to try." That was the human way. They might lose. They probably would lose. But they were going to try. In the depths of space, the Dreth fleet moved steadily toward Sol. Fleet Commander Drethax reviewed the data on the target system with cold satisfaction. The third planet was rich with water and organic life. The indigenous species had primitive technology and a small defense force. This would be an easy harvest. Drethax had destroyed 37 worlds in his long life. He had watched civilizations beg for mercy and crumble into dust. He had never lost a battle, never even faced a real challenge. The humans would be no different, but as the fleet drew closer to Sol, the sensors began to pick up strange readings. Ships were moving everywhere in the system, not fleeing outward, but gathering inward, forming patterns, taking positions. What are they doing? Asked one of Drethax's officers. The fleet commander studied the display. They are preparing to resist. Foolish creatures. Yes, Drethax agreed. Foolish. But somewhere deep in his ancient mind, a small voice whispered a warning. These humans were not acting like prey. They were not running. They were not hiding. They were doing something that Drethax had never seen before. They were getting ready to fight back, on Earth. President Ortiz addressed the world one more time. She stood in front of a simple backdrop. No flags or symbols, just a woman talking to her people. They are coming, she said. They think we are weak. They think we will break. But they have never met us before. They do not know what we are capable of. They do not know that humans have spent their entire existence fighting against impossible odds. We have survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters. We have climbed mountains and crossed oceans and reached for the stars. And we will not stop now. She paused and looked directly into the camera. 17 days, my friends. We have 17 days to show the universe what humanity is made of. Let's make them count. The screen went dark, but across the world, lights stayed on. People worked. People prepared. People held their loved ones and promised to protect them. The long night had begun, but dawn was coming, and so were the humans. The Dreth fleet emerged from subspace like a swarm of dark clouds rolling across the sky. 47 capital ships, each one so large that it blocked out the stars behind it. Their hulls were black and covered with strange patterns that seemed to move and shift in the dim light. Around them flew thousands of smaller vessels, fighters and bombers and troop carriers, all of them hungry for destruction. Fleet Commander Drethax stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Hunger. He had been alive for 800 years, and he had seen the death of more worlds than he could remember. This system would be no different. The third planet was blue and green, covered with water and life. His ships would drain it all. Scan the system, he ordered. Show me what defenses they have. His officers worked their controls, and a holographic map appeared before him. Drethax studied it with cold eyes. He saw the orbital stations around the third planet. He saw the small fleet gathering near the fourth planet. He saw the mining operations in the asteroid belt. Pathetic, he said. Begin the approach. Standard harvesting formation. The fleet began to move forward. The capital ships formed a wide arc, their weapons charging with terrible energy. The smaller ships spread out to flank and surround. They had done this so many times that it was almost boring. Move in, destroy the defenses, harvest the planet, move on. Simple. Easy dot, then the sensors went crazy. Commander! An officer shouted. Multiple contacts emerging. From behind every planet in the system, ships appeared. They came out from the shadow of Mars, from behind the moons of Jupiter, from the asteroid belt where they had been hiding among the rocks. They rose from the rings of Saturn and launched from hidden bases on distant moons. Ships of every size and shape, from massive carriers to tiny fighters, all of them moving toward the Dreth fleet. Drethax stared at the display. How many? The officer's voice was shaking. Over 3,000 confirmed. More still emerging. 3,000 ships. The humans were supposed to have less than 1,000. Where had they found so many? Drethax felt something he had not felt in centuries. Surprise! Admiral Kevin Park stood on the bridge of the carrier Defiance. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and a face that had seen too many battles. Around him, officers from 20 different nations worked together in perfect coordination. They had trained for years for a moment like this. None of them had expected it to actually come. "All fleet elements," Park said into the communication system. "This is Admiral Park. The enemy has arrived. You all know what's at stake. You all know the odds. But I want you to remember something. Those creatures out there have destroyed dozens of worlds. They have never been stopped. Today, we show them what it means to face humanity. Today, we become the first civilization in galactic history to fight back. Today, we make them remember our name." Across the fleet, crews cheered. In the fighter base, pilots strapped into their small ships and powered up their weapons. On the carrier Constellation, Captain Marcus Cole watched as wave after wave of fighters launched into the darkness. Lieutenant Amy Vance led the first attack squadron. Her fighter was small and fast, built for speed rather than armor. She had 23 pilots under her command, all of them volunteers who knew they might not survive the day. "Stay in formation," she told them over the radio. "Target their sensor arrays first. If they can't see, they can't shoot." The fighters streaked toward the Dreth fleet like a swarm of angry insects. The alien ships were so massive that they blocked out the sun, casting long shadows across the battlefield. But Amy was not afraid. She had grown up on stories of human courage, of soldiers who had faced impossible odds and refused to give up. Now it was her turn. The Dreth opened fire. Beams of green energy cut through space, turning fighters into balls of flame. Ships exploded all around Amy, but she kept flying. She dodged and weaved through the incoming fire, her hands steady on the controls. "Stay focused," she shouted. "We're almost there." Her squadron reached the nearest capital ship and split into teams. Some went for the sensor towers, others for the weapon ports. Amy aimed her ship at a cluster of communication dishes and opened fire. Her missiles struck true, and the dishes exploded in a shower of metal and sparks. The Dreth ship shuddered. Its fire became less accurate as its sensors went blind. Other squadrons followed Amy's example, targeting weak points all across the enemy fleet. On the Eternal Hunger, Dreth watched his display with growing fury. The humans were not supposed to fight like this. They were supposed to scatter and flee. They were supposed to beg for mercy. Instead, they were attacking with a ferocity he had never seen. "Destroy them," he commanded. "All ships, concentrate fire." The battle raged for hours. Human ships fell by the dozens, their crews dying in the cold vacuum of space. But for every ship that was destroyed, 2 more took its place. The humans fought with desperate courage, throwing themselves at the enemy again and again. On Earth, people watched the battle through telescope feeds and satellite images. They saw the flashes of explosions and the trails of missiles. They saw ships burn and break apart. And they saw their defenders refusing to retreat. In a small house in Colorado, an old woman named Betty Carson sat by her window and watched the lights in the sky. Her grandson, Tommy, was up there somewhere, flying one of those tiny fighters. She had told him not to go, had begged him to stay safe. But he had looked at her with those stubborn eyes and said, "Grandma, if I don't go, who will?" That was the question, wasn't it? If not them, who? If not now, when? Humanity had always asked those questions. And humanity had always found the answer in itself. Back in space, Admiral Park studied the tactical display. They had hurt the Dreth, damaged several of their ships, destroyed hundreds of their fighters. But it was not enough. The capital ships were still advancing, their shields absorbing most of the human attacks. At this rate, they would reach Earth in less than 2 days. "We need something bigger," he said quietly. "Something that can break through those shields." On the research station orbiting Titan, Dr. Susan Bell heard his words through the secure channel. She looked at the device sitting in her laboratory, a weapon she had built years ago and then locked away because it was too dangerous. "Admiral," she said, her voice calm but serious, "I may have what you need, but someone will have to deliver it directly to the enemy flagship. The weapon only works at close range." "How close?" "Inside their shields." There was a long silence. Everyone knew what that meant. Whoever flew that mission would not be coming back. Admiral Park closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his voice was steady. "Send me the specifications. I'll find someone." But before he could even issue the request, volunteers were already stepping forward. Pilots, captains, engineers, soldiers. Men and women who were willing to give their lives to save their world. Captain Diego Reyes was chosen. He was a quiet man with dark hair and sad eyes. His wife had died 2 years ago, and he had no children. When they asked him why he volunteered, he simply said, "Someone has to go. I have less to leave behind." They loaded the weapon onto his ship. It was a small device, no bigger than a suitcase, but it contained enough power to tear a hole in space itself. Diego looked at it for a long time before climbing into his cockpit. "Tell my sister I was brave," he said to the deck crew. "Tell her I did something that mattered." His ship launched into the darkness, heading straight for the heart of the Dreth fleet. The storm was coming, and humanity was not going to hide from it. Captain Diego Reyes flew alone through the chaos of battle. All around him, ships exploded and burned, filling space with debris and fire. He kept his eyes fixed on his target, the Eternal Hunger, the massive flagship of the Dreth fleet. It was bigger than anything he had ever seen, a mountain of dark metal floating in the void. His hands were steady on the controls. His heart was calm. He had made peace with what he was about to do. Some people might call him a hero. He didn't feel like one. He just felt like a man doing what needed to be done. The Dreth saw him coming. Their smaller ships tried to intercept, but human fighters swarmed around them, drawing their fire away. Lieutenant Amy Vance led the escort, her voice crackling over the radio. "Keep going, Captain. We'll clear a path." She dove into a group of enemy fighters, her weapons blazing. 2 of her pilots went down in flames, but the others pressed on, fighting with everything they had. They were buying Diego time with their lives. Diego reached the outer edge of the Dreth shields. This was the dangerous part. The shields were designed to stop missiles and energy weapons, but they would let a small ship pass through if it was moving slowly enough. Of course, once he was inside, there would be no escape. He slowed his ship and slipped through the shimmer of the energy barrier. For a moment, everything went quiet. He was inside the shield bubble, alone with the massive flagship. The hull stretched before him like a wall of darkness, covered with strange symbols and ugly weapons. "I'm in," he reported, beginning final approach. On the Defiance, Admiral Park watched Diego's signal move closer and closer to the enemy flagship. Every person on the bridge held their breath. They all knew what was about to happen. "Good luck, Captain," Park said softly. "And thank you." Diego didn't respond. He was too focused on his flight path. He aimed for the center of the ship, where the command bridge was located. Dr. Bell had told him that the weapon needed to be detonated as close to the core as possible. The closer he got, the more damage it would do. Alarms screamed as the Dreth finally noticed him. Point defense guns swiveled toward his tiny ship, but he was moving too fast, changing direction too quickly. He had been a test pilot before he joined the military. He knew how to fly like no one else. The hull rushed toward him. He could see the individual plates of armor, the rows of weapon ports, the dark windows of the command sections. Inside one of those windows, He knew stood Fleet Commander Dreth, the creature who had destroyed so many worlds. "This is for Earth," Diego said. He pressed the trigger. The weapon activated. For a single moment, a tiny point of absolute destruction appeared inside the ship. It was a tear in space itself, a wound in the fabric of reality. Everything around it was pulled inward and crushed into nothing. The eternal hunger tore itself apart from the inside. The explosion started at the center and spread outward in a wave of fire and broken metal. Diego's ship vanished instantly, consumed the same destruction it had caused. But the damage was done. The flagship broke into 3 pieces and drifted apart, fire pouring from its wounds. Every system on board failed at once. Fleet Commander Dreth died without even understanding what had killed him. He had survived 800 years and conquered 37 worlds. And in the end, he was destroyed by one human with nothing left to lose. The shockwave from the explosion spread through the Dreth fleet. Other ships were caught in the blast. Their hulls crumpled and their engines crippled. But even worse was the effect on their organization. The Dreth were not creative beings. They followed orders from above, and with their commander dead, those orders stopped coming. Ships began to collide with each other as their navigation systems failed. Fighters flew in circles, not knowing where to go. Some vessels tried to retreat, jumping into subspace without proper calculations and emerging inside asteroids or in the hearts of distant suns. Admiral Park saw the chaos spreading through the enemy formation. He knew this was their chance. "All ships," he commanded, "press the attack. Give them everything we have." The human fleet surged forward. They hit the confused Dreth like a hammer, driving deep into their broken lines. Carriers launched every fighter they had. Battleships fired their main guns at point-blank range. Even the civilian ships joined in, ramming enemy vessels and detonating their cargo holds. On Earth, people watched the battle turn. The flashes in the sky changed from slow and scattered to fast and constant. Word spread through the cities and villages. The flagship was down. The humans were winning, but the fight was not over. Some of the Dreth ships recovered their coordination. They formed a defensive circle and began a fighting retreat toward the edge of the system. 39 of their capital ships had been destroyed or disabled, but 8 remained, and those 8 were still deadly. The battle moved from open space to close combat. Human Marines boarded damaged Dreth vessels, fighting through narrow corridors with rifles and grenades. Sergeant Ryan Cho led a team through the smoking hallways of a crippled harvester ship, his soldiers clearing room after room of the insectoid enemy. "Keep moving," he shouted. "We need to reach the reactor core." The Dreth fought hard. They were bigger than humans, stronger, and had 4 arms each. But they were also confused and afraid. They had never been boarded before. They had never faced enemies who got close enough to look them in the eye. Ryan's team reached the reactor and planted their charges. They barely made it out before the explosion tore the ship apart. Another enemy vessel gone. Another step toward Victory Dot in the skies above Tokyo. Lieutenant Amy Vance chased the last Dreth fighters through the upper atmosphere. Her own ship was damaged, leaking fuel and sparking from a dozen hits. But she refused to give up. She had lost too many friends today to quit now. She locked onto the final enemy fighter and squeezed the trigger. Her last missile struck true, and the alien ship spiraled down into the ocean, trailing smoke and fire. "This is Vance," she reported, her voice exhausted but triumphant. Airspace clear. Across the solar system, the story was the same. Human ships hunted down the retreating Dreth, destroying some and driving others away. By the time Earth's sun rose over the Pacific Ocean, the Dreth Collective had lost almost everything they had brought. The survivors fled into deep space, their subspace engines screaming as they ran. They broadcast warnings on every frequency. Do not go to Seoul. Do not challenge the humans. They are not prey. They are something else. Something terrible. On the orbital platform where the fleet commanders had gathered, Admiral Park finally allowed himself to sit down. He was old and tired, and the weight of the past few days pressed down on his shoulders. So many had died. So many good people who would never see their families again. But they had done it. They had beaten the Dreth. They had saved Earth. Dr. Susan Bell found him there, staring out the window at the blue planet below. She sat beside him without speaking. There were no words for what they had just accomplished. No words for what it had cost. Diego Reyes, Park finally said. We should build him a statue. We'll build 1,000 statues, Bell replied. One for everyone we lost. Outside the window, the sun rose over Earth. The sky was full of debris and smoke, but through it all, the light still came. A new day was beginning. And humanity was still here to see it. 3 weeks had passed since the battle. The debris was still falling from orbit, pieces of destroyed ships burning up as they entered the atmosphere, leaving bright streaks across the night sky. Children made wishes on them, not knowing they were watching the graves of warriors. The rebuilding had begun immediately. Humans did not wait. They never waited. Before the last Dreth ship had even left the system, construction crews were clearing rubble and repair teams were patching holes in orbital stations. Factories that had built weapons switched back to building tools. Shipyards began working on new vessels, stronger than before, better than before. The dead were remembered. In every city on Earth, memorial services were held. Names were read aloud, stories were shared, tears were shed. Captain Diego Reyes was honored with a small grave marker in a cemetery outside Houston. There was no body to bury, of course. He had been vaporized in the explosion. But the marker was there, a simple stone with simple words. He was here. He made a difference. Lieutenant Amy Vance attended the ceremony. She had been promoted to captain after the battle, but she didn't feel like celebrating. Too many of her friends were gone. She stood at Diego's grave and touched the stone with her fingertips. You saved us all, she whispered. I hope wherever you are, you know that. On Valanthos Prime, the Galactic Council reconvened. The Great Hall was full once again, but the mood was very different from before. The crystals on the walls glowed a strange mixture of colors that the translators struggled to interpret. Something between amazement and fear. Ambassador Lena Brooks entered the chamber. She walked slowly, her head held high, her delegation following behind her. Every eye in the room turned toward her. She could feel the weight of their attention, the questions they were too afraid to ask. The Arbiter, Moltrick, gestured for silence. The Council recognizes the ambassador from Earth. Lena stepped to the central platform. She looked around at the assembled species, at the beings who had written off her world as lost. They had expected her to come begging for aid or crying about her losses. They didn't understand. 3 weeks ago, she began, you told us to run. You told us to evacuate our world and find somewhere else to live. You told us that the Dreth could not be stopped. She paused and let her words sink in. You were wrong. A murmur ran through the hall. The Vellani ambassador shifted uncomfortably, her light flickering with embarrassment. The Corsian delegate, Victro, clicked his 4 arms together nervously. The Dreth came to our system with 47 capital ships, Lena continued. They expected to find easy prey. Instead, they found 3,000 vessels waiting for them. They expected us to scatter and flee. Instead, we attacked. They expected us to beg for mercy. Instead, we showed them none. She pulled out a datapad and activated a holographic display. The image showed the scattered wreckage of the Dreth fleet, floating in the empty space where the battle had been fought. 39 of their capital ships were destroyed. Over 2,000 of their support vessels. Their flagship was torn apart from the inside by a single human pilot who flew into its core and detonated an experimental weapon. The survivors fled our system, broadcasting warnings to stay away from Earth. The hull was completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. "We did not do this because we are stronger than the Dreth," Lena said. "We are not. We did not do this because we have better technology. We do not. We did this because when our home was threatened, we refused to give up. We ran toward the danger instead of away from it. We fought not because we thought we could win, but because we would not accept losing." She looked directly at the arbiter. "That is what humans are. That is what you failed to understand about us." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Kryn delegate, Grothmer, rose from his seat. His massive armored body moved slowly, his scales catching the light. He walked to the center of the hall and stood beside Lena. "On behalf of the Kryn people," he said in his deep, rumbling voice, "I formally request a mutual defense pact with humanity. We have never met a species like them before. We do not want to face them as enemies. We want them as friends." Another delegate stood. Then another. The Gorthaks, the pale beings who breathed different air. The Zilani, the silver-skinned traders from the far reaches of the galaxy. Even the Villani, who had been so certain of humanity's doom, rose from their floating positions and added their voices to the chorus. One by one, the species of the Galactic Council asked to ally with Earth. Within an hour, humanity had gone from being a minor civilization on the edge of known space to being the most sought-after partner in the galaxy. Back on Earth, President Hannah Ortiz addressed the world one final time. She stood on the steps of the Capitol building, which was still being repaired from damage caused by falling debris. Behind her, construction workers continued their labor, their tools creating a rhythm of hammers and saws. "My fellow humans," she said, "we have done something that no one believed was possible. We faced an enemy that had never been defeated, and we survived. We lost many brave men and women along the way. We will never forget their sacrifice. But we proved something to the universe and to ourselves. We proved that humanity does not give up." She smiled, her eyes bright with tears that she refused to let fall. "The galaxy is watching us now. They see us as warriors, as fighters, as survivors. And that is true. But I want them to know something else about us. We are also builders. We are also dreamers. We are also lovers of peace and creators of beauty. We did not fight the Dreth because we enjoy war. We fought them because they threatened our home, our families, our children." She paused and looked up at the sky, where distant stars twinkled in the fading light of day. "If any other species out there is thinking about attacking Earth, I want them to understand something. We don't want to fight you. We want to trade with you, learn from you, share our music and our stories with you. But if you come to take what is ours, if you try to hurt the people we love, you will find us waiting. And you will learn the same lesson the Dreth learned." She turned back to the camera, her voice steady and strong. "Humans protect their own. Always. No matter the cost." The broadcast ended. Around the world, people cheered. They hugged their families and kissed their children and looked up at the stars with new eyes. They had always dreamed of reaching the heavens. Now the heavens knew they were coming. In a small bar in Seattle, Maria Santos sat with her husband Diego. Not Captain Diego Reyes, the hero who had died saving Earth, but a different Diego, a mechanic who had spent the battle helping repair damaged ships on an orbital station. He was alive. He had come home. And as Maria held his hand across the table, she understood what President Ortiz meant. Humans protect their own. The galaxy had watched in horror as the humans bolted out of the assembly. They had expected to see a species running to its death. Instead, they had witnessed something else entirely. They had seen a people who would never stop fighting for their home, who would sacrifice everything to protect the ones they loved. And now the galaxy understood. Humans were not just another species in the vast emptiness of space. They were something special, something fierce, something wonderful. They were humanity, and they were just getting started.